Guess who? Who else? Hello folks. Good evening to all the members of the Facebook Dennis Nilsen group. After having spoken with Mark earlier this evening, I think it's about time I finally made this video. I've been thinking of doing so for a while because it's too long-winded to try and type out all of it, so I'll just tell you, shall I? April 1983. My actress mother was appearing on stage in the West End in London's Shaftesbury Avenue Lyric Theatre, as it happens. This would later turn out to be in the same area where Dennis worked and where Dennis operated, shall we say, because in all of the Dennis documentaries they always show you that 1983 news footage of Piccadilly Circus, which is right by the theatre. And this is right by all of the diners and pubs that Dennis would have frequented. Now, I don't have any personal connection to the case myself. The only reason I'm telling you all of this is because in April 1983, I was 10 years of age and I was going down on the train to London to go and stay with my mother down there. I was by myself. And the train had only just pulled out from Liverpool, really. And we weren't even at Runcorn or Crewe just yet. And the train guard came right up to me and was demanding to know, who am I with? Where are you going? What have I got in my bag? And all of this sort of stuff. And I just thought he was being an interfering, nosy old busybody. And I did not appreciate this unwanted attention at all. I thought he was just being really nosy. If this wasn't bad enough, he stopped the whole train at Runcorn station and waited for a woman police officer to get on the train, a WPC, to get on the train and question me where I was going, why I was, all of this stuff. And despite the fact that I gave him my grandfather's phone number and he rang him up and spoke to him and told him where I was going and the fact that I was going to be met by my mother at the other end at London Euston Station, this still wasn't good enough. Okay, so here I am on this train by myself, 10 years of age. I am being questioned by this train guard and this woman police officer in front of the whole carriage, where I was going, what's in my bag, why are you going down there, who are you with and all this, why are you by yourself? I couldn't see what the problem was. I did not appreciate this unwanted attention at all. I do remember thinking that the WPC looked like Juliet Bravo, but mind you, didn't they all in those days? So I asked her what the problem was, and I remember she said, "Oh, it's all right, love, you're not in trouble or not, and we're just a little bit concerned about your age." My age. 10 years of age. Still quite independent by then. So I just thought he was being a nosy, interfering old busybody, and the fact that he stopped the whole train and I'm being questioned in front of the whole carriage, I did not like that at all. Now, even when we reached London Euston, he got off the train with me and he would not let me out of his sight until we got to the ticket barrier, where I was met by my mother and she explained to him, yeah, he's with me, it's blah blah, Obviously, me and my mum, you can't tell us apart, so it's obvious that bloody hell, I wasn't being trafficked or anything. I'd made that journey many times before by myself, so I couldn't understand what the problem was. And I just thought he was being a nosy, interfering old busybody, and I didn't appreciate it at all. It took me years and years, decades, to realise that I now appreciate his concern, because, as I said, folks, this was April 1983. My mother was appearing in Blood Brothers by Willie Russell at the Lyric Theatre on Shaftesbury Avenue. As a matter of fact, the lead role was Barbara Dixon. My mum was her understudy, and Barbara Dixon was taken ill, so my mother stepped into the lead part, and a week later she was on the front page of the Liverpool Echo, our main newspaper here, which isn't bad. 5 months later, the main dressing room that she had would sadly turn out to be the same dressing room where Leonard Rossiter passed away. But that's another story. But it took me years to realise that his concern for me had to be a direct result of the Nilsen case. Nilsen was arrested in the February of 1983, as you all know. This was in April, so the case was, the whole of 1983 really, folks, was bookended by the whole case in the newspapers constantly for 10 months solid. As you know, he was arrested in the February, the trial was in the November, and in those intervening 10 months he was never out of the news. There was always revelations from ex-colleagues, ex-army friends, people he'd worked with at the job centre, people he'd spoken to in pubs. For those 10 months, it was never out in the news. And when you're 10 years of age, 10 months feels more like 10 years. So it was the major, massive, biggest news story that year. He was, of course, thought to be Britain's worst or biggest ever serial killer at the time, only because the certain crimes of a certain doctor from Manchester and a certain couple from Gloucester hadn't been uncovered yet, but they were still happening at the time. So his concern for me, I now appreciate, because the recent 3-part BBC thing, the Nilsen Files, if you look, you'll see there's a young Scouse lad getting off the train by himself at London Euston. How do I know he's a young Scouse lad? Because he's got a Liverpool FC bag and he's wearing red and white trainers. I guess it takes one to spot one. He's also wearing a Motorhead t-shirt, so whoever he was, he's fine by me. But when I look back on it now, when I thought he was just being nosy, I appreciate his concern. Young lads going down to Liverpool, running away from home, they've been disowned by their families for either getting involved in drugs or coming out as gay, which back then, the stigma attached to being gay back then was just disgusting. I can't relate to that, but being born autistic, I didn't choose that. I was just born that way either, so I can relate that way. So coming down to London and expecting to find the streets paved with gold and finding something very different when you get there, expecting to find employment, you know, these are the people who Dennis preyed upon. As far as I know, Ken Ockenden and Billy Sutherland were the only two who were ever reported missing. That's why he only went for people who he thought couldn't be accounted for. Poor old Carl Stotter, as you know, had been completely disowned by his own parents for coming out as gay. So he only went for people who, you know, at least 4 people are remained unidentified to this day. And considering the backyard of Melrose Avenue area is now a block of flats with a car park, all of those bones and all of that evidence would now be buried under concrete, and all those people would still be anonymous to this day, had Dennis not confessed. So whoever this guy was, 40 years later, belated thanks to you, and I now appreciate his concern, because I'm sure he saw many runaways down to London from Liverpool, in particular, in those days, when the unemployed Thatcher's Britain thing was at its worst. Here we are, 40 years later. I'm a proud Scouser. Liverpool doesn't have one single Tory Scouser, and it never will. They hate us. So I'm sure he saw many runaways from Liverpool who went down there, and, you know, so you get the picture. So, as I say, I thought he was just being a nosy, interfering old busybody, and now I appreciate his concern. But his concern for me, and the fact that he would not let me out of his sight until we got all the way to the ticket barrier, simply has to be a direct result of the Nilsen case. I never had any personal contact with Dennis myself personally. I suppose this is probably the closest I can get, but because it was the top major news story that year, it was never out of the news. It has to be a result of the whole, when you think about his victims and the only sort of people that he would go for. He was very clever and wily the way he did it, and I'm not condoning it, but I'm not a true crime or serial killer fanatic at all. Okay? I'm not interested in any other serial killers, like Mark says, but if this wasn't interesting, folks, we wouldn't be talking about it now, and you wouldn't be watching this video now. He's interesting, and the case is interesting, but I'm not a Nilsen fan. Yes, I'm wearing a Rolling Stones t-shirt as usual. I won't wear t-shirts with Nilsen's face on it, but it's still interesting. It is intriguing. When I see his face next to the likes of other famous serial killers who I won't even name because I wouldn't even waste a breath, even I still don't think that's right. He wasn't like them. He was in a league of his own. But that doesn't not make him an interesting character. It's all interesting indeed, in its own little way. We've all got something weird about us. I'm sure there's people out there who think that Nickelback are the greatest band ever. As far as I'm concerned, these people need mental help, but that's just me. But anyway, thank you for listening. As I say, for years I thought this guy was just being nosy, but I appreciate his concern now. But his concern had to be a direct result of the Nilsen case and the fact it was all over the news, and I'm sure you all know and you all understand why. Anyway, rant over. Thank you for listening. I shall now get off my soapbox, and I shall look forward to your comments underneath this video. Thank you all. Good night.